could you talk a little bit about your mindset as you're using data-driven marketing methods, and then take us through maybe a couple of key points around what businesses should be doing and how businesses should be thinking about this?
Sure. So the first thing I would say is this applies, in my experience, and at least something that I, encourage or push the teams to focus on. This applies not only on sort of data-driven marketing. I think it applies in business in general, and that has to do with the scientific method for sure. But I would describe it better perhaps as just being scientific towards identifying growth opportunities, right? And that doesn't mean that you need to trade off creativity. That doesn't mean that that you just got to always follow a formula. But it means that if you do it in a methodic way, you'll be able to discern what's meaningful versus not meaningful faster. And once you're able to do that, you can iterate on it, and that's what drives growth, right? So it just starts with an observation, right, or a data point. Or it could, and again, this is where I say it doesn't necessarily have to be data-driven marketing. It could just start with a point of view, right? And that's fine. But once that you have that, you need an overall objective or hypothesis that you can go and test. If you don't have that, then it's going to be very difficult to define success. And also very important to understand within that objective what's in scope and what's out of scope. Right? I've seen many times in business when there's a description of what's in scope, but there's no specific clarification of what's out of scope, and that just takes people in very, very interesting paths where they spend most of the time trying to explain why they're not doing something as opposed to just focusing on what was supposed to be in scope in the first place.
Yeah, good one.
A good example of that would be, if you're developing, I'm trying to be generic here, I can give you specific examples for Expedia, but if you're developing a new value proposition, for your product and your success metric is engagement, then make sure that you perfectly articulate that driving incremental, customer growth is out of scope, right? Because when you look at your success metrics, that could be a quite normal question. It's like, well, but are we driving incrementality? It's like, well, no, because that was not the aim of this experiment, right?
Yep.
And have very clear key results. And if you think of the themes I'm touching on right now, it's kind of following almost the scientific method, right? But if you have key results and you know exactly what's the expected output, then you can define what your success criteria is. What are the primary and secondary measures of success or metrics of success? And that also allows you to identify what are potential risks or dependencies that could become blockers into executing on that marketing strategy in this case. And of course, having an estimated business value always helps, right? When it's not only about the metric, but exactly how much value is that going to deliver to the business. So that's in general terms. Now, when it comes to more specifically, the application of that into technology or everything that we're doing with marketing or data science. Expedia went through this transformation a few years ago where there was just a focus on making data-driven observations and follow the scientific method. And the way that allows us to operate today has transformed the way in which we innovate in every single thing we do, not only product, marketing, even as I said in some forums, even HR today follows the scientific method in the way that they operate at Expedia. And you're pretty much taking real-time information and think of an e-commerce environment and letting your customer tell you what they like and don't like in real time.
Interesting.
Right?
Can you give some examples?
Well, the simplest example would be an A/B test, right? If you're A/B testing something, what people don't realize is that you're actually getting real-time feedback of if an ad resonates more with an audience or not. How you take that feedback and how you iterate on that process is what then drives the success. But that's in the simplest example, right? There are obviously many other more complex ways in which you can apply the scientific method. You can apply data science into the way that you're automating process and learning from those data loops and learning from your customers to improve your product, to improve your marketing. But a few things that I would say is key to to focus on. From a marketing standpoint, if you think of how complex marketplaces have become, the multi-dimension nature of the cross-channel marketing world we live in today, there are multiple storefronts and touch points, right? And I always say the same thing, which as marketers is kind of unacceptable. To ignore the infinite amount of data that is coming our way. And everyone talks about big data, I know, but if you really take that data and ensure that the next customer interaction is being informed and dictating by the data that you've been gathering, naturally you're enhancing whatever you're putting in front of your customers, either a product or a marketing message or a value proposition or whatever it is. And in the past, that linear sort of path to marketing was pretty simple, but today it doesn't work like that. Today we have different devices. Today we have those multiple touch points. Today we have complexities around multi-channel attribution and cross-device attribution, and so it's a lot more complex. And the amount of customer data out there means that the customer journey is quite fractured. So unless we find a specific ways in which we can start to test with the data that we're gathering is very difficult to deliver on measurable results and iterate on those, which goes back to what I was saying before, right? Just following that simplistic approach to the scientific method. So what that means in practice, again, when it comes to marketing, when it comes to data-driven marketing and measurement, if you're truly thinking about the customer, then in order to drive sustainable growth, you need to understand the value that customer or set of customers brings in the long run, right? And I love this quote, which it's from a guy from McKinsey that I think is an emeritus partner now, as they call him. He writes a lot about capitalism, right, and the future of capitalism. And he says that the vast majority of most firms' value depends on the results 3 years from now, which that's how it works. But yet management is preoccupied with what's reportable 3 months from now, then capitalism has a big problem.
Right?
And that happens all the time. So if I go back to what I was talking on measurement and data-driven marketing, we as marketers, we got to focus on the outcome, not on the metric that you're capturing, right? So some metrics like cost per acquisition, et cetera, are great directional indicators, but they don't determine the value of our investment, right? So you need to look at what are the levers that you have in order to drive business outcomes like customer lifetime value. And the moment that you do that, you will be challenged on your attribution models. You will be challenged on the shape of what your P&L looks like on a month, on a quarterly basis, even on a yearly basis. And at Expedia, we're starting to make decisions in those terms, which is, well, you have one attribution model that will tell you the return on your ad spend, and you have a shadow attribution model that tells you that the mix might look slightly different if you start looking at lifetime value metrics, and not only on a 12-month basis, but even an 18 or 24-month basis. And if you're really about delivering a business growth in a sustainable and future-proven manner, you cannot be looking in that short term. You got to be being scientific, utilizing your data, and applying those metrics that look way beyond that monthly, quarterly basis.
Yep.
And that keep the customer at heart, because the moment that you do that, then customer centricity really kicks in, because you're really delivering what the customer is interested, not only today, but 12 months from now, 24 months from now, and that drives loyalty, that drives business growth.
Yep. Oh, sorry, did you have something else to add?
You're asking about data-driven marketing, and the one thing that is important to explain is, why data is so critical, right? The more informed you are and your organization is, the more valuable your hypotheses become, right? And I was referring to the scientific method before. So data democratization and the access to it is fundamental to drive a test and learn culture, which is what drives that excellence, that iteration, at least in our business. And having the infrastructure and data warehouses to capture the data is an important foundation, for sure. But having the right tools and the analytics for different people to make sense of it, it's obviously needed. Now, what really makes the difference is acknowledging that unless every single person within the organization have access to the data, and there's a culture that drives an expectation of everyone having to experiment with it, the potential is not being maximized, right? So the sooner the data supply chain can be streamlined and the data democratized for the consumer, the end consumer, that could be your marketing manager, that could be your product manager, the sooner that data become a strategic asset. So the test and learn culture at Expedia wouldn't really exist unless every single person within the organization had access to the data tools, to the performance dashboards, to the frameworks. But I think most importantly, they were encouraged to fail all the time and make data-driven decisions knowing that they're going to fail. About 70% of our tests fail. And unless you go through that journey and the business is ready to invest on failing, then you won't be able to really make the most out of the application of the scientific method into, the experimentation to your product and marketing. The, core there is to just do it fast, right? You go, experiment, fail, do it fast, learn, and move on to the next thing.
Excellent. And I want to go back to something you said before about long-term growth. Can you give us a bit of a sense for how that process works for you? So how you define what that long-term growth looks like, what indicators you look for long-term growth, and then reverse engineering, what leading indicators you look for in order to get to that place. Can you walk us through that process, the step-by-step process?
Sure. Let me walk you through the process, and I'll try to sort of share an example. But let me start with the process. Well, first of all, you need to define. Well, as I said, you start with defining based on an observation, coming up with a hypothesis, right? And once that you have your hypothesis and it's a strong enough hypothesis that you can go and test, then you start the testing process. And in terms of metrics and to your question of what does that look like in the long term, it depends on what your objective is, right? So if your objective is to drive for example, the shape of your P&L would dramatically change if you drive 90-day repeat rate of your customers.
Yep.
Right? And the lifetime value of your platform mix varies. It's a tangible example. So customers on the Expedia app are worth more, repeat more, are most loyal customers than customers transacting on web. Right? So, process-wise, you're going to define that your objective would be to get a customer to transact on the app. Hypothesis being that if they transact on the app, they have a higher lifetime value because, they have a lifetime value, but the hypothesis is that is because they repeat more, they're more engaged, and there's higher attach rates. As in, if you go and book a flight,
right,
the likelihood or probability of booking a hotel is higher. So that's the process, right? So you got your metric, which is 90-day repeat rate, which determines the lifetime value. You got your hypothesis in place, and you go and you test that. Now, the what's happening in the analytics world behind it, it's, I'm not going to get into the details of that, but that's just, the way that you would set up your attribution model to look at the click stream and look at if a customer clicks on a marketing link, most likely on Google, it will cost you money. And where does that customer click before he transacts? How much of those clicks can you save if that customer goes direct into your platform? How does that impact your cost per acquisition? How does that bring up your what we call our marketing contribution? And if they end up, because of that journey on the app, on the platform preference, how then the lifetime value increases, and you test that hypothesis. What are some of the challenges of this? Well, statistical significance, reaching statistical significance when you're, applying some of these tests, particularly when you're trying to do it in a small region. If you're trying to do it globally, that's fine. If you're trying to do it in the US, that's fine. If you're trying to do it in Taiwan, it's not so easy. So, there are techniques to address those challenges where you can bundle together, similar cohorts that could comparatively allow you to reach that significance faster, or make certain assumptions. So that's the process that it would take, and I tried to describe the process with a tangible example, trying to simplify it, right? But a tangible example of, well, you come up with a hypothesis, you have the metric that is the driver of that lifetime value, and then what follows after doing that is, or in parallel to that, is you need a predictive model, this is where it gets complex, that will allow you to tell you that in fact, that's going to be the value, the lifetime value of that customer in 12 or 24 months.
Right. There's a lot of art and science to that.
Yes. And hopefully, if you're still around 12 months later, then see how accurate your predictive model was. And once that you have that 12-month cohort with a predictive model, sort of stress testing it, you adjust the predictive model. And then life becomes a lot smoother.